Pode começar, Célia.
Ok, bom dia a todos. Nós estamos iniciando o 5º webinário de certificação. Webinário de certificação. Desculpem, eu sou Séries, estamos começando o 5º webinário de certificação internacional. Sou Séries Cavalcante, coordenadora da consultoria Miras, coordenadora. Vocês só me perdoem que eu estou com problema técnico aqui que está dando retorno. Vou repetir, estamos iniciando o 5º webinário internacional de certificação. Eu sou Séries Cavalcante, sou coordenadora do projeto H2 Brasil pela empresa de consultoria Niras, e vamos passar alguns dados técnicos aqui antes de passar para a abertura oficial do evento. O evento está sendo transmitido simultaneamente pelo canal da HK Rio de Janeiro e no YouTube, tanto em português quanto em inglês, e as perguntas podem ser encaminhadas aqui, enviadas pelo chat. O evento é realizado pelo projeto H2 Brasil, que integra a cooperação Brasil-Alemanha para o desenvolvimento sustentável e implementado em parceria pela GIZ e o MME, com financiamento do Ministério Alemão BMZ. As perguntas, nossa equipe de moderação, ela fará o agrupamento e o envio dessas perguntas que estarão no chat aos palestrantes, e o evento será gravado e disponibilizado no canal da HK do Rio de Janeiro no YouTube. Vocês podem acessar os outros 4 eventos também lá no canal, que já ocorreram, né, nessa série de webinar sobre certificação de hidrogênio. E para aqueles que querem acompanhar em inglês, o canal do YouTube está disponível. Hoje teremos na agenda palestras. Vamos iniciar com a abertura do Ministério e da GIZ, seguindo com palestra do Fraunhofer, com o Rodrigo Pastel e o Christoph Host, e, na sequência, a palestra da PSR com a Luana. Na sequência, teremos a palestra da ANEEL com o Igor Walter e a palestra da Patrícia Costa, do Ministério de Minas e Energia. Por fim, encerraremos com um debate numa mesa redonda que teremos, além dos palestrantes, a presença também da Núria e do Ricardo Gedra. Eu vou passar, sem mais delongas, rapidamente para a abertura oficial, passando a palavra para a Patrícia, que é coordenadora geral no Ministério de Minas e Energia. E bom dia, Patrícia, bem-vinda, e passo a palavra para você.
Parece a Patrícia ainda não conseguiu se conectar, Séries. Talvez a gente possa fazer uma breve inversão.
Ok. Desculpem, a gente está com vamos iniciar, então, com o Andrei Frieser, dando as boas-vindas pelo programa H2 Brasil, da GIZ. Passa a palavra para você. Bem-vindo, Andrei.
Muito obrigado, Séries e Zeca. Então, bom dia a todos e a todas. Quero dar as boas-vindas aos que estão participando do 5º webinário sobre certificação de hidrogênio, promovido pelo projeto H2 Brasil. O H2 Brasil integra a cooperação Brasil-Alemanha para o desenvolvimento sustentável e é implementado pela Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit e pelo Ministério de Minas e Energia. É financiado pelo Ministério Federal de Cooperação Econômica e Desenvolvimento da Alemanha. O projeto é fruto do reconhecimento do enorme potencial do Brasil em produzir hidrogênio verde e seus derivados. Como todos sabem, o objetivo do projeto H2 Brasil é apoiar a expansão do mercado de hidrogênio verde no Brasil, aprimorar as condições legais, institucionais e tecnológicas da toda a cadeia de valor. A certificação do hidrogênio verde, portanto, é necessária para que avançamos nessa expansão tão necessária para setores de difícil descarbonização. Esperamos que as discussões aqui contribuam para ampliar o conhecimento sobre a certificação do hidrogênio verde e os desafios que são enfrentados para a indústria brasileira para atender ao mercado nacional e internacional. Para nós da GIZ, que atuamos há mais de 70 anos como Brasil, para ampliar a utilização de energias renováveis e para promover a transformação urbana justa e socioambiental no país, é muito gratificante para ampliar nossas discussões para falar de um tema tão importante para o hidrogênio verde. Desejo a todos um ótimo evento. Obrigado.
Obrigado, Andrei. Como estamos com um probleminha na entrada da Patrícia aqui na reunião, ela avisou já está entrando. Eu vou, então, abrir já para... E a gente está com a agenda muito cheia, né? São muitas palestras, muitas pessoas, uma mesa também farta. A gente vai para, então, abrir a palestra da Fraunhofer, e depois a gente volta com a Patrícia para poder dar sequência ao processo do evento, ok? Então, na sequência agora, temos uma... Desculpa, Fraunhofer não, temos uma apresentação do Felipe Toro, da Niras, que vai apresentar hidrogênios e derivados para exportações e lições aprendidas nas discussões anteriores sobre certificação do H2. Felipe, bem-vindo. Felipe é o team leader da equipe Niras, né? Bem-vindo, e te passo a palavra, então, para depois a gente voltar para a palavra da Patrícia.
Muito obrigado, Ceres, pela moderação, e muito obrigado a SECA pela organização do evento. Também muito obrigado a Andrei, a toda a gente. E não sei se queremos aguardar um pouquinho por a Patrícia. Posso já começar a compartilhar um pouquinho aqui os slides que tenho preparado para hoje. Ok. Então, um pouquinho de informação sobre nosso projeto. A estrutura do projeto envolve 5 componentes principais. Elas são condições estruturais, disseminação, capacitação, cooperação e inovação, pesquisa e desenvolvimento, ampliação do mercado e o market ramp-up. E nossas atividades aqui como Niras, a coordenação, nosso role aqui nesse projeto é a coordenação do componente 1, que são as condições estruturais. Aqui um pouco a cooperação, não, entre o governo alemão, o governo brasileiro, o Ministério de Minas e Energia, o nosso anfitrião aqui no Brasil, e a GIC como organismo implementador contratou, então, uma equipe de consultores no Brasília para fazer todos estes estudos que estão aqui nesta slide. Temos um estudo de benchmark internacional, também um mapeamento de atores, que fizemos na cooperação, por exemplo, com GESEL, ou com Senai Cimatec, e com CETESB lá em Stuttgart. Também temos estudos de planejamento energético, potencial, cenários, expansão da rede de transmissão de gás, transmissão de energia elétrica. Esses são estudos que fizemos agora, estamos finalizando com o Instituto Senai, Easy de Inovação en Natal y con Factor Energy en Río de Janeiro. También tenemos estudios de apoyo a todo lo que son estrategias regulatorias y status quo de las regulaciones aquí en Brasil. También hicimos con GESEL, con IBINI y con los colegas de Stuttgart, con CTSB también. También tenemos en el estudio 4 estudios ambiental y social que hicimos en una cooperación con PTI, el Parque Tecnológico de Itaipú y MidCity. Y, por ejemplo, hoy tenemos una serie de webinarios. Hoy es nuestro último webinario para este año que hicimos en cooperación, por ejemplo, con Moniras, más también con otros consultores y convidados a palestrar. También
We also have studios to apply the green standards and certifications. We also have this company INVINI for mining, and also the launching of the projects that we have in partnership with the. We have some pictures here, but we can see that we're going to work with many researchers and consultants here. Thank you for everyone that is coordinating and the organizer for the excellent work you have been doing so far. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about the introduction of this demand, this regional demand that we have for hydrogen. In the level, we have a lot of studies that shows this. Tones shows in this diagram that indicates the regions: China, North America, Europe, India, Middle East and North Africa, Japan and Korea. And you can see the sectors and their respective demands of this kind of energy, of hydrogen. The costs are the main propellers of the adoption of the green hydrogen that we have to overcome. And these hard to abate sectors can propel the biggest part of the demand in the long term for green hydrogen. Also important here to notice that till 2050, these are the projections for different sectors. And there will be a 42% of the total demand for green hydrogen. We're talking about more than 250 meters of hydrogen. That's equivalent to 42% of the total demand. And we have the decarbonization of the transport sector that demand 215 tons. That's equivalent to 36% of the total demand of hydrogen that is caused by the industry and the transport. So we have the system of energy, storing energy and flexible services that the market has 25 tons. And here we have introduction how we're to present the costs of the offer. So, okay, the studies that we have about the international trade of hydrogen are kind of optimists. And we understand the cost drop to 2050 in the whole chain. And the main concern in this scenario is the costs renewable energy.
como amoníaco,
It's
metanol u otros
of
opciones de
the
electricidad,
options we have.
más también costos mucho más bajos y soluciones tecnológicas para el transporte.
It also reduces costs for the
Ver aquí un poco la diferencia con los mercados de energías o de combustibles.
You can see what
Arreglar
the
combustibles
with the fossil
fósiles,
fuels sectors,
diferencias de las renovables,
the difference between the renewable
fueron
ones.
más concentradas en grandes productores
Uh,
en muchos
See,
países.
it was much more concentrated in many countries.
Y la energía renovable, por otro lado,
So
puede ser producida
when
en
you
cualquier
compare with the
lugar del mundo,
renewable, that can be when you compare the renewable energy, when you see many cost benefit when compared to the fossil fuel countries producer. You have the transmission lines, for instance, for long distance, that can be an option, but they're quite expensive. And the use of transporting this energy can be an alternative as a renewable energy that goes beyond the borders. For instance, in the hydrogen space would be the escalate of the technologies and efficiency that might compensate the cost of the areas from the production to high demand use. We would get a lot of but the transport, we can transport the ammonia, hydrogen, and this how transportations will impact the so when the conversion and the losses of energy here, it has
Esas pérdidas serán las mismas independiente de conversión, ser feita en una región importadora o exportadora, es decir, por tanto, parte de la conversión en el punto exportador, por ejemplo, Brasil, en Inglaterra, o en Rotterdam, en Hamburgo, que va a recibir las cantidades de hidrógeno o de amoníaco. Se tiene que pensar también en esa diferencial de costos del commodity final, más también en esa reconversión para un hidrógeno, ¿no? Todo eso tiene un impacto también mayor en la viabilidad económica de estos proyectos. Entonces, para que ese comercio económico a largo plazo sea económico, el costo de producción de hidrógeno verde debe ser suficientemente en la región exportadora o que en la región importadora para compensar los costos de transporte. Y aquí acho que ya tenemos también muchas informaciones que Brasil será uno de esos países con mayores ventajas competitivas en costos de producción. Ese diferencial de costo se tornará mayor a medida de que a escala de los proyectos aumentar y la tecnología se desenvuelve para reducir los costos de transporte. Eso también va a jugar aquí a largo plazo. Acho que
we need to foster and enhance technology so as to improve costs. So with that, we have the forecast of costs for transportation costs and to see if we can foster and enhance those technologies. So the hydrogen trade can reduce the cost of this exportation in Brazil. It can also increase the energy systems so as to produce more energy, but we could have some unexpected events. And I'm pretty sure we should have more arguments or debates to renew this energy and work with hydrogen. As you can see in this graph, we can see an overview of this trade, and we have, it's basically a screenshot of the future of how it's gonna be in the future. But we need some permits for that. But in this scenario, in which production costs and transportation costs are also low or potentially low. And our most important partners would be the North African countries, the Middle Eastern, and Australia. The most importantly, the Asian market, but also Latin America, which is pointing out right now. Latin America is also an introduced market, and you can see some of the connections with other markets and exports to Europe, as he's pointing out. Without further ado, I would say that the trends and investments that are being carried out in Brazil is also having an effect in Europe as well. So you can see the opportunities for Brazil in the green hydrogen global market. So I gave you guys a little bit of a historical background, so to give you a context and to compare Brazil to other countries. So you can see the overview of hydrogen in 2022. You can see how competitive Brazil were. And you can see that we're working with one of the most important actors in Brazil. And we're also working with solar energy. So you can see a lot of possibilities there. And you can see the costs for producing hydrogen here. And this costs should be around $2 or $4 a kilogram, more or less, in average. As for production costs and exportation costs for hydrogen, this is something that we need to work out. This stems from the Ministry of Energy. But the most important part of these technologies would be transportation for ammonia, gas, cooking gas, and others. As you probably know, the cost of electrical energy is the most important factor that needs to be taken into consideration. It's up to 73% of the A2B production costs. So you can see the renewable and electric energy. And we have other types like photovoltaic energy, which are glassing close to $30 per megawatt, which I believe that in Brazil, this is a very good KPI in terms of the competitive level of renewable energies. Now, to wrap up my presentation, another message that I would like to convey to you guys is the role that ammonia is going to have in 2050 onwards. So ammonia is going to be used globally, and we're going to be converting 20% into hydrogen. And that means that this cost and the knowledge about this type of energy in regards to ammonia specifically is much more relevant. And this market's going to be 4 times larger than right now, both in terms of transportation, but also used as a fuel. Now we have some information for green ammonia in 2 delivery points. So you can see in Rotterdam and Tokyo, and you can see the situation, the 2 countries. So you can see the transportation cost. And we're going to have more detailed information from other speakers, but we can at least forecast the cost of green ammonia unsubsidized in those 2 countries that I'm pointing out. And this is going to go on until 2027. And in Brazil, these are going to be the most competitive ones in the world. So what are the factors that are going to have an effect on the investment decisions in Brazil? We're always thinking about the transportation costs and production costs, but we also have other things to take into consideration. Many other actors and elements that are need to be considered that are important and relevant when thinking about making this type of investments. So you can see there is a lot of interaction between areas like the economic, policy, technical, political, industrial, and hydrogen ecosystems, among others, which are very important aspects in terms of development, and also in terms of trade politics. And I would like to stress out some technical side of things, which is the experience of developing similar projects, the domestic capacity for producing equipment, and patents and P&D in regards to hydrogen. And all of those are important to foster this type of work. Another thing that I would like to stress out is the industrial use of hydrogen, its applications, its production, its consumption, and what shipyards we deliver to, but also the scales and routes that are used to deliver that product, but also the political certification sustainability side of things. So that's what I had to say today. We believe that this series is so relevant because of the reason that we presented today, and we want to present you the results. So you can see a summary of our webinar series. The first one happened in May 2022 with the Global Hydro Certification Schemes, in which we carried out some presentations, and we moved forward with 2023, March 7th, and we share a little bit more about those schemes in Brazil, and also the trends and impact in Brazil. Then we move on to the third one in May 23rd with Day 2 certification exporting purposes. He has 2 more minutes. And this, so we have all those experiences stemming from this study case that we carried out. And this is my last slide, basically showing the results. And the last webinar that I carried out in July, the most important message of it is shown there. And the ones that were accepted. So we had very good goals and things that we need to work on. But it's important to say that we need to work on the national framework in Brazil, so as to articulate all the sectors on the legislation in regards to safety and security in hydrogen, which is especially important. Also to use it as a fuel and to create other products like natural gas and also white hydrogen. Now I'm going to show you the criteria for harmonization, which is part of the debate on the last webinar that we carried out in June. Besides the technical issues that we dealt with, we also touched on geopolitical conditions, like countries are looking to foster the routes with the highest potential in their region, and it's unlikely that the current global standard will be accepted if their features will not include the diverse technological routes which will contribute to the carbon-free emissions. And I think that's becoming more clear, gradually clear, that the ministry in Brazil is also trying to get to this zero carbon emissions. And obviously we need to study and work on our results and to foster those processes in regard to these economical and technical possibilities. We also need to foster flexibility instruments in certification processes, take into consideration the eventual changes in the electrical grid, as for instance, the lack of water, among others. It's also important, as a last point, to hear from many actors in the supply chain of hydrogen, which is going to consist of many technological routes, sectors, academia, and related associations, so as to come up with a national certification to comply with national ambitions. And also experiences like RenovaBio, which are going to add value to this process and to this national certification process. And we also need to take consideration the infrastructure and the available resources in the country. Thank you so much, the organization. It's a really good to be a part of this event, and thank you so much for this attention. I know there are more than 600 people in the last one.
De vuelta para José ahora.
So, Ceres, I'll hand over back to you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Felipe. Excellent presentation. Very, very fruitful with a lot of data and exceptional work that you have been doing. Thank you so much. Now, before hand over to Fraunhofer, I'd like to get back to Patricia so she can bring the opening words on behalf of the Ministry of Energy of Brazil. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ceres. Thank you, Felipe and Andrei, for the contextualization for the project H2 Brazil. I'm very happy to be here in this last seminar of the certification of the webinars that we have been doing of the H2 Brazil project. That is a partnership in between the Ministry of Mines and Energy and the German Council. Here we have through GZ. This one is the last one webinar. I would like to bring a reflection that since we have begun the Hydrogen National Program, how much we have advanced in the discussion of hydrogen in Brazil and over the world. Despite having policies concerning hydrogen for more than 20 years, policies for researching that were implemented by the Science Ministry since 2005, and the guidelines for the policies on hydrogen we have deployed only in 2022, and this team was working better since the international agreements for the decarbonization on global level with the United Nations has a transformation of the energy sources in Brazil. And from the beginning, when we started to deploy the Hydrogen National Program, we have the specifications, and we didn't have much documents and much discussion. And on the last year, we have evolved a lot on this discussion with a lot of international forums where we attend on behalf of the Brazilian government, and the technical also forums that we have technical groups that are dedicated to discuss the certification of the hydrogen. And then the Hydrogen National Program. Also, we have a regulation committee that are working on the certification with the guidelines, and the CCA that is going to give us a lecture further on today, and especially about the certification part. And here we are in a very good moment in this webinar because we have this published the last version of the triennial work plan that brings actions for 2023 to 2025 and has the priority the implementation of a legal framework for the hydrogen in the country. That is an action that was proposed by the regulation chamber, and that brings the regulate certificator. We are going to bring more information further on when what we are discussing in the committee, but I would like to reinforce the all the discussions that we are doing with H2 Brazil project. That brings us support for the implementation of the public policies over concerning hydrogen in Brazil. So I'll hand over back to Sérgio to moderate the webinar. Thank you, Patricia. It is very good to hear the ministry words and to have your presence here, to have you attending here, and obviously bringing more richness to our webinar, to the events, and also bring this perspective from the government concerning this topic. So bringing a sequence to this opening and to the points that were placed on Felipe's lecture, I'd like to invite you for a lecture of 25 minutes where we can open for Q&As at the end. That is the Fraunhofer's lecture with Rodrigo Passer and Christopher Cost. The comparative analysis of the right ways and power to act in emerging countries and in development. Welcome. I would like to hand over Rodrigo Pastel and Christopher Cost. Good morning. Thank you, Sérgio. Thank you, Nidas, and to people of H2 Brazil for the invitation. I'd like to briefly present the Fraunhofer here in Brazil, what is the discussion we're talking about, and then Dr. Costa will bring the details of this study. So thank you again for the invitation. I will share my screen with you. I hope that you're hearing me well. So I'd like to start without no furthermore. I'm Rodrigo Pastel. I'm the director of the office of Fraunhofer here in Brazil, working for more than 10 years in this company, and we are the focal point of all the activities of Fraunhofer here in Brazil, along with the German institutes and also overseas. What do we do? So the Fraunhofer Society is the biggest society of applied research in the world, and we focus in sector, public sector and the private sector in benefit of the society. So we're talking about more than 30,000 collaborators only in Germany, with a volume of more than 30 million of euros in researches. And from this 3.1 billion, with 2.6 billion was in research contracts. We are always like to be in contact with the development industry. So 73% of these contracts are with industry and publicly funded research projects. And the other 46 are the contracts that you have the industry, but not only industry, with the other agreements funding. We also have the state and federal investments, like in Germany, when you have a university and in the industry and the Fraunhofer Institute making the bridge between them. We are basically an institute of research, and we born within a group. So we're talking about the research groups that talk about technology, of resources and bioeconomy. And when these groups interact, we form these alliances looking to the market. So we are talking about focus on energy, chemistry, and so on. But also we do basic research. So we have 7 fields where we look to the future. And one of these fields is about hydrogen technologies. So you see that we have an international scenario, but mainly in Germany, where we help the German government over the technological transfer and the strategic studies for the implementation, roadmaps, and the technological transfers, so we can speed up these products to the market. So you can have an idea, Fraunhofer was founded by Mr. Fraunhofer, that lived in the 18th century, and then he has developed other projects of telescopes. And you have the lines of Fraunhofer, and the researchers have the same guidelines. So you see, we have a lot of technologies, and the most famous one is the MP3. So we are in all spectrum of human knowledge areas. The projects that we develop also have these four pillars: the scientific, the economic, to impact the environment, and the social. We have a lot of innovation applied, and each project that in each euro that we invest from Fraunhofer, we return 21 from the German government. So you can see that we have a big impact into the German society. And you have the core of our business here. We have the research contract, the spin-offs, licensing of intellectual property, standardization, head and transfer of the head and careers, where you take care of the professionals in the market, facility services, and we are present in more than 80 countries with partnerships in other institutes overseas, besides the office here in Brazil. So if you want more information, you have the Fraunhofer magazine. You have you can reach through the app on the Play Store or Apple Store. And here in Brazil, you have the BrazilFraunhofer.com, where you can be updated with all our initiatives, what we are doing overseas and regarding technologies, especially over Brazil, in this address website. Here you have we are available for any possible doubt or any information you might need. Thank you, Rodrigo. So, moving on, the Fraunhofer Institute. Now we invite Dr. Christopher Cos, that is Director of the Analysis and Energetic System Analysis Department. Welcome.
Yes, welcome and good morning also from my side, from Germany to Brazil. It's a pleasure to present our study. You see the study here on the right-hand side, the title and the picture. The study that my team here at Fraunhofer Institute for Solar Energy Systems was carried out deals with a very important analysis, not only for Germany, but also for many other countries, regards the analysis of site-specific and location-specific analysis on Power-to-X pathways and products. I'm a researcher here at the Institute, and this analysis is done with, in the Department for Energy System Analysis and also in the Department for Hydrogen. So there are many experts in the field of system analysis and hydrogen involved. I've brought one quote of our report on the first slide here. We think as a project team that it's very difficult to really find the best places for hydrogen and other hydrogen products production in many countries. Therefore, it's very important to include as possible parameters in the analysis. It's the profiles of the renewables, but it's also geographical aspects, infrastructural aspects and conditions, but of course also administrative, also social conditions, and therefore site-specific analyses are very important for hydrogen and the market growth of hydrogen products. In our analysis, we try to analyze different countries in the world regarding their potentials and costs for the production of different products. You see the selected countries here worldwide. You see also that we analyzed different products, also different products per country. It's a little bit depending on the country conditions. One important point that for countries which are in closer link to Germany, we also included the analysis how the products are transported to Germany by pipeline. In the other countries, we analyzed how these countries can ship the products to worldwide customers. And one important point of our analysis was also that we just let renewables as the only source for the production for hydrogen. So no other sources are used. Electricity sources are used to produce the hydrogen. So it's mainly focused on onshore wind and solar PV here in this analysis. To give you a little bit an insight what we have done in our study, and very important is always to look on the renewable potentials. Then we try to figure out where export terminals, ports are available in the countries. We also captured the aspect of water supply for hydrogen production. So we included in the analysis also energy demand for desalination, for example, in countries where is it required. And one important thing, we also use the electricity grid just as a backup solution and not for the key source for the electricity. So there were always a power transmission and expansion included in the analysis. As I've said on the right-hand side, then we also distributed our analysis between the production and the supply cost of PTX, and then on the different products. We defined also specific systems which are used in our analysis for wind power and photovoltaics. We try to simulate as realistic as possible these technologies in our simulation software. And as I've said, also the transport capacity are included in the analysis. As a first step to make it possible to compare the analysis, we said that there is one electrolysis power plant of 1 gigawatt, operated, as I've said, with 100% renewables. This is the baseline which should be elevated for each country. And I've also said that we try to analyze the costs of the factory gate, production cost, but also the cost which appears at the destination, and we call them supply costs. Of course, there are also additional costs for customers if you transport the hydrogen or the other products from the port to the final destination then. Go a little bit closer and to give you a more insight, I think we developed a very good model to really include as we could in our analysis from the location parameters, from geographical information, from the profiles, from the electricity generation, the export routes, and so on. Then we are using an optimization model which provides us the best sizes of each entity in this production chain, from renewables and electricity to the product, to the PDX products. And as you can see, we included here also, for example, if needed, direct air capture. We included the cost for ships, etc., if needed. And then we obtained, as a result, the cost per kilowatt or per megawatt hour of the product. We use euro as unit. As you know, it's almost similar in entities compared to dollar, so the values are comparable to dollar prices, as the exchange rate is almost 1-to-1. What we obtained, then there are here the different indicators in terms of cost. We obtained also here this what's called from our side Pareto front. It's here on the right hand side, that there are different optimal solution for each power plant depending how much you want to export of the PTX. And there is an optimal solution of a certain price for this product, but sometimes it's only slightly increased if the amount is higher. So to give you an insight on our geographical analysis, in our analysis, we used a lot of restrictions where these huge solar or wind power plants are not able to be built. Here we used nature reserves or military zones, which are excluded from the analysis. We also said that it's not possible to build these huge power plants if you have high inclinations. These power plants have to be in closer distance to major roads. We said below 100 kilometers. We excluded also areas where you have certain land use, for example, for agriculture. We excluded areas with a high density of population, because then very often the acceptance rate of large infrastructure is lower. And then, of course, the existing infrastructure in the energy system is also included, as you've seen here, for example, the power grid, and the distance should be not too high. We connected this with the wind and solar resources, and obtained then a final map for each country where we have these excluded areas, and of course the resources for solar and wind. And this was then included in our analysis and for our site selection of good locations. Very important, we used here a very standardized approach, because we want to capture all these countries, and it's nowadays very possible to carry out such an analysis, as a lot of these data are available, and you can connect these data for your site selection analysis. I want to jump over a little bit on this slide. I've already said this here. Therefore, I go to the next slide. Just as an example, we calculated the distance for pipeline transport to Germany. We also included the distance for the shipping roads from the different locations worldwide to obtain our analysis. And then we calculated it in the different countries. As a first step, we selected certain location as very good location for renewable energies. Here you see the dots where we selected certain points. You see also the different assumptions that we have included in our analysis. And as a last step, we obtained the LCOE, the cost for the electricity generation in each country for different sites. And this was then included in our analysis for the hydrogen production. You see here also that Brazil comes along with a very low renewable electricity cost. And this is also very important then for the further analysis of the hydrogen production. Similar for solar, here you can also see the values. You see also here that Brazil shows very interesting prices, very similar to values which has been shown by Philippe Pitot in the last slides. So after we obtained the electricity generation prices and all the profiles, we included this in our simulation software. And I come already to the results of the certain products. You see here the cost for the different products in megawatt hour, so not in kilogram, so in megawatt hour, to compare hydrogen cost also easily, for example, with electricity, which is very often given also in the unit megawatt hours. And you can, it's more easily compared to a price in kilogram. If you look at the results, we see a wide spread, not only between the countries, also we see a spread with, between the different products. The main reason is, of course, that we have different products with different conditions, different production processes. For some technologies, we need carbon. In other technologies, we do not need carbon for the production. So we have very different production chains, and you see that the prices are different in the end. These prices are now calculated, of course, with uncertainty of costs for many technologies that are included here, but these costs are calculated from our team as a total price to produce the products and to ship them to Germany, to the Brunsbüttel, where you see here the arrow in the top of the slide. You see also here that Brazil comes also with very attractive prices for the products that we have calculated for Brazil. We just see, for example, lower prices for hydrogen in Spain or in Morocco. And that's the reason, because we used here the pipeline as energy transport possibility. And therefore it's more cheap compared to a ship transport of liquid hydrogen from Brazil. But for example, if you compare then the prices for ammonia, you see that it's quite competitive to other countries here. I've brought here this comparison for liquid hydrogen for the different countries, and you see what I've said already, that you see here, for example, a very site-specific production cost, depending very often, of course, of the renewable condition and also transport distance within the country. And therefore, you see also within the countries differences in the production cost. What you also see is the total exported amount, and that's also always connected with the price. If you are able at a certain location to produce a lot of hydrogen because you have very good conditions, for example, very good wind conditions, then of course the amount of the PTX product at this site for this 1 gigawatt electrolyzer is higher. one of my last slides, a focus on Brazil again. I want to detail a little bit what we have included in our study on Brazil. So for example, here you see the maps of different locations that we selected as an example. And you see also that we are able to distribute the different cost items on different aspects. Of course, you have the price for wind and solar as a big cost item, but then you see also the electrolyzer, for example, or for example, if you have hydrogen as a liquid for export, that a lot of the cost comes along with the liquefaction of the hydrogen. With this, I want to conclude with a look again on the different hydrogen and PTX products. We found that ammonia shows the lowest cost if you compare it to methanol and liquid hydrogen. Of course, pipeline transport of the products is very interested at transport routes where it's possible. And for example, for energy carriers which are more easily can easily shipped over long distance, then ammonia and methanol are also very interested from different locations in the world. With this, I want to stop here. I want to thank you for the possibility to present the study. You see the study again here with title. You can find it in the internet. So feel free to have a look. It's a 200-page report, and I think you will find a lot of more insight there. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Christoph.
Thank you so much, Christoph. It was a very enriching presentation, and also your analysis were quite enriching, especially in regards to the foreign comparison, especially the production cost that you compared in each region. And then I have a question for you. So we got a question which we're going to reframe it. In the meanwhile, I have a question for you. So other hydrogen derivatives like methanol, were they considered for Brazilian exports? Because in your graphs, we could see that in many other locations, there were more derivatives of hydrogen. So why did you choose those derivatives in Brazil? Christoph?
That's a good question. I think it was a pre-analysis to select not every product in each country, to limit a little bit the range of the analysis. I would say it's not the final selection, for example, for Brazil. It was a first shot to limit it a little bit in the number of products.
Entendi. Muito obrigada.
Okay, I got it. Thank you for the answer. Now, also focusing on Brazil, what were the criteria for selecting the shipyards or the delivery points that you use to quantify these costs? So how did you select the ports and shipyards? That's what she wants to know.
We did analysis of the renewable potentials, as we knew from other projects that the cost for electricity is one of the key aspects for the hydrogen production. So we try to first select areas with very good conditions. And secondly, we try to limit the distances within the country from port infrastructure, from grid infrastructure, and therefore we try to come up with these 3 locations. As you have seen, we captured many countries. We had to done it for every country with a very similar approach, and therefore I would say, of course, the analysis of the site selection in each country has to be dealt also with aspects of much more information on the industry base, for example, of available construction possibilities, maybe also information on the ownership of land, to really come up with huge power plants in this area, because very often, yeah, we know that these plants are very huge. They cover a huge land area, and therefore, of course, these aspects, also I mentioned in the beginning, social aspects are very, very important, and to also include in this analysis, because yeah, these power plants and also the production of hydrogen will have an impact on industry, on society, and also yeah, on the land use.
Perfeito. Muito obrigada.
All right, thank you so much, Krista. Professor Krista, thank you so much. So Rafael asked something very similar to me in the chat. So basically the criteria for selecting the shipyards. But I would like you for this final remark on regards of what challenges or bottlenecks do you see for Brazil, considering the analysis that you carried out? So you analyzed 3 major elements in Brazil, right? So do you think we can be competitive? So to wrap it up, what would be the challenges and the potentials of Brazil as a final remark?
As I've said, I see Brazil as very competitive. We saw in our analysis. I think it's very important to really connect solar and wind sites as best as possible. It's very important. And then also that yeah, the grid infrastructure is also improved, expanded, and the time of construction is really considered in this respect, so that there's a very good infrastructure planning, and yeah, this is very often a very difficult task.
Ok. Muito obrigada, muito obrigada.
All right, thank you so much, Fraunhofer. Thank you, Professor Christoph, but also Rodrigo, for the presentation and the final remarks that you made, and for answering to our request of being part of this study that is going to be so important for this round of debates. Now I'm going to like to invite Ms. Luana Gaspar from PSR. Luana is going to present a study that is ongoing on certification study cases for hydrogen for the international market. Now I'm going to hand it over to Luana, and I'd like to thank you for being here today. Thank you so much, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning for you. Thank you so much for inviting me today. So I'm going to introduce myself quickly. I apologize because we had a separate meeting. I had to leave. So I apologize if there is too much noise because okay, Luana, you can move forward. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, so the presentation is something that I'm preparing by GIZ, and it's part of the A2 Brazil project. It's going to be carried by PSR. I'm going to introduce us in partnership with H Inicio, and Nuri is going to explain that later on. So this study is regarding the international systems for hydrogen certification and derivatives in Brazil. So there are going to be many steps in this study. I'm going to comment on that, but this presentation is going to be focused on some international projects. So we interviewed some participants of international projects that are more advanced in terms of development, both in terms of the project and the certifications. I'm going to show you guys a little bit later on. So the goal of this project is to participate and foster the international acknowledgement of hydrogen production, especially in its renewable form and in Brazil, but also in other localities. So we want to assist projects, but we also want to work with public policies in this area so as to draft recommendations. We also analyzed the potential bottlenecks to export ammonia. We started that in November, and we're going to wrap it up in October this year. So I'm going to present the timeline of what we did so far. So in December, we delivered the first report, which basically consisted of analyzing all the certification that were focused on hydrogen and SAF, but also its derivatives like ammonia and methanol. So the certification market is developing over time, especially after the Europeans started working on that. So at the time, they prepare many new systems and new rules as well for using those systems. So this first product was a hot shot at the moment, was a trend of what was going on for international certification systems for A2 and derivatives. Then in January, we delivered this report focusing on how these systems would work in Brazil. So Brazil and Brazilian experience with certification, both with hydrogen, but also with other types of energy. So we analyzed the renewable, we analyze projects that are similar to this one, and we also analyze if Brazil was ready for this implementation in terms of the percentage of renewable energy. And people always mention 90%, right? So it's something that we analyze. Then in July, we carried out an assessment of international projects, as shown there in the timeline. Then in August, we carried out an export study case for green ammonia, so as to see if there are any bottlenecks or hurdles that we need to overcome. And then in September, we're gonna deliver this report with a technical visit. So we talked to the European Commission with some doubts that we had in terms of the criteria that were used for the publication. So in terms of their sources and other issues related to the translation of this criteria to Brazil. So all these criteria, because there are many, and they're focused on European energy systems, but there are some issues specific to Brazil that didn't really fit our reality. So we analyze many of the certification systems, and we also analyze projects, especially German projects for producing hydrogen. Also another German project for steel production using hydrogen. And I visited a shipyard in Germany, and I have a very interesting shipyard about that as well. And at the end, we're going to have a final report that's going to be published. So all they're not made public yet, but at the end of the project, it's going to be published. And then you'll have all the recommendations, also the conclusions in regards to this analysis. So it's something that is going to be made available this year. So now focusing on international projects. So what did we do there? We selected 10 projects, 10 international projects to interview. So we selected more advanced projects in terms of development and certification. So we selected both in terms of different types of energy, different type of resources, different geographies and localities, and different final products as well. So this approach of ours was quite comprehensive in regard to all the types of projects that we could analyze, and we also looked after for similar projects that are similar to Brazilian reality. And as mentioned before, these are projects that are more advanced. So we select the projects in many countries like the Netherlands, Chile, Brazil, Germany, Peru, France, Spain, Canada, and Australia. And it involved methanol, hydrogen, renewable ammonia, and different energy sources and non-biological sources, as well as biological sources. So we also analyze biomethanol, which is quite relevant for Brazil. Brazil has a very large production capacity for hydrogen, and we know we use electrolysis as well, which is very important, but we also analyze other processes that don't use electrolysis. So I'm going to present the most important outcomes or conclusions that we got out of it with those interviews. So the first thing that I would like to stress or highlight that I think that's going to be beneficial to you is the fact that the certification market still has many uncertainties because of its maturity level. So it's not mature enough. It's under development, ongoing. So it's not just up to the certification systems. There is also an issue of the legal framework. We still need to develop our legal framework like carried out in the European Union. We need to do the same in Brazil. And there is a lack of harmonization or standardization between regions. So depending on the market you're looking for, you could be using different criteria to include them or not in this project. So these uncertainties, they're related to the quality of the systems. And we know we are developing new systems every single day, and they have new features and new qualities. So it goes to show that this market is still growing and developing. And there are little of practical applications. So we don't have a very good translation to each reality or to each region. So we need to adapt them better. And some of those projects are not certified. But for them to be certified, they need to understand the reality of each country better. They need to understand the local reality better as well. We also have few little systems for hydrogen derivative products. So we don't have many for ammonia, even less for methanol. And if you see for green steel, it's still something that's just starting. So we need to develop that over time as well. There is a lack of maturity in terms of the legal framework, as I mentioned, a lack of harmonization or standardization. So if you compare Asia to Europe, you see a very large difference in terms of criteria. And this creates some project risks. So for instance, if the project needs to have the certification and the criteria are varying in according to location, so this project needs to be amended so as to fit into each reality. So it needs to be fitting to the reality it's put in. So in regards to that, we notice some valuable strategies. So we're using more passive strategies in terms of waiting for the legal framework to be prepared, and we're obviously following up the evolution of this legal framework. So then once it's actually defined or clear, we can actually make the decision. And in the meanwhile, this project, we are focusing on using renewable energy and how we can reduce CO2 emissions so as to be ready once the legal framework and the certification are ready to be used. So just to give you guys a disclaimer, this analysis were carried out before the EU regulation was launched. So if we do the same analysis in 6 months from now, it's quite possible that we see some different conclusions or outcomes, okay? Then we had developers that were more active in terms of actually getting to know the legislator and certification systems, and they actually are helping us a lot in terms of adapting this criteria. And some of them creating their own regulation system, so like ammonium nitrate or hydrogen derivatives, for which the certification is not ready yet. So in those cases, we're trying to come up with our own project. So we also notice other projects that we classified as pioneers, meaning that they're already linked to certification system, or they have a pre-certification system, or they are certified as according to previous criteria, so as to have their product certified as according to the current law and then change it afterwards. Besides the strategy, one thing that we really realize is that the certification system really depends on the target audience and consumers, because this it's still something that is quite voluntary, and the sustainability requirements for consumers, they tend to be more relevant than requirements for a very specific system.
Choose the best program for your project in general that meets the criteria that are required. Then we verified that the developers were going straight to the projects of certifying methanol instead of hydrogen. They were certifying straight methanol instead of hydrogen. And they commented that also the certification of learning in doing, I believe the process of learning should be performed before. Of course, it's important to understand the certification, and of course, along the process, more challenges are coming and being discovered. So it's something that you end up learning through the process. And we're talking about internal capacitation, training, selecting and consulting to help, some experts to help. And only one had required specific training to support the whole process. And then we realized that there isn't a clear reference to the systems. And we saw the systems that to Highland, to Sud, Zero Carbon Certification Scheme, ISCC, all the systems that were being applied, but at the end, we have some recommendations that are important to consider all the criteria of regulation and certification in the initial phase of the project, because if the objective to meet them, they impact the design of the project, so it will be easier to design the project considering this criteria instead of adapting later on. The second is if you don't have a target audience defined, we have to develop a strategy, a more efficient strategy will be to guide through the more strict regulations, like the European regulation guidelines, that to be a useful criteria, and also this issue of being flexible, considering that the regulation are being developed, they don't have quite defined. If you have a flexible project, it can be the ideal, because it's not an easy thing, but if you can adopt some kind of flexibility would be better to understand, to be flexible if in case of any change of regulation, and to adopt an active strategy with the governmental entities, and to try to be more practical and faster with this project. And at the end, the topic of assess the certification system in advance, to assess the data you have to rise, have to generate through the project, if it's the consumption of the electric power per hour, or among other metrics. It's important to understand, because we need to have enough resources to have when we're going to get the certification. So because if there is a lack of data, you're going to take more time to take the certification. Having the data from the beginning, you speed up the certification process. So that was what I would like to bring to you. I'm open for any possible doubts you might have, and we're going to have a table that is going to be a little bit complicated for me to attend, and I would like to ask sorry in advance. But Laurie is also part of this study, and she can clarify whatever you need. Thank you, Luana. Excellent presentation. Unfortunately, due to the time, we are going to move on, but I'd like to make a quick question to you. You haven't analyzed projects in the Middle East and in Africa, right? I saw that you collected projects from different points, but I imagine that it's a quick answer because I can imagine it, but I'd like to hear from you. Also, another question. All the analyzed projects began by the need of the off-takers. I would like to ask you to be brief in the answer, please. This Age Match Africa, it's more a matter of scope. We had 10 projects to analyze, and we got in touch with some of them, but these 10 that appeared was more interesting and more connected to the Brazilian reality. So we end up limiting they said, of course, it would be interesting to analyze Middle Eastern and Africa projects that needed to be developed as well, of course. But concerning the other question, to have the off-taker is very, very relevant to this project. It's not necessarily the main point that everybody approach, but it's quite relevant to have the economic feasibility. The outtake generates confidence that how much it would be paid for this hydrogen, and how I don't have a very defined market of hydrogen. It would be nice it would be interesting to have off-taking to start a project, considering the actual scenario. Thank you, Luana, for the rich presentation. It was very interesting. I'm here supporting the idea of having more conclusion of this study, and I'd like to let you know that you from on YouTube, you can ask whatever you want to know on the chat of YouTube. Even if you don't have enough time to answer during this presentation, we can take it to the roundtable later on. So you are invited to post your questions on the chat. So moving forward, we're going to invite Dr. Igor Walter, assessor of the board of ANEEL, the Energetic National Agency of Brazil. Thank you, Dr. Igor, for attending our meeting. Good morning. Let me share my screen. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank H2 Brazil, to you, Ceres, for the invitation, Agnes da Costa for trusting, and to Lux Ribeiro that have supported me in the preparation of this material. And I'd like to greet the table on Patricia Takashi. So here we have some stock images. I would like to ask for your forgiveness in advance if some of the images might sound offensive. I would like to tell a story. I was invited to take part in the strategic planning, and we had this in the Ministry of Energy and Minas Resources. And he was making a projection to 2030. And after his lecture, I could make a question about the fuel cells. I thought it was really interesting. And why we don't have the two fuel cells on your lecture? Why you don't consider that? And he said it was out of a horizon. Today, the fuel cell, it's in the horizon of the planning of the agency now. And the same way that the natural gas is the fuel of the transition from fossil fuels to renewable ones, we can think about on the electrical vehicle as a transition from the fossil fuels to fuel cell. And with the hydrogen, it makes a whole sense when it comes to hydrogen. When we think about the governance of the electrical sector or power sector, we have a formation of the public policies through the government and the Ministry of Energy and Mines. And we also have well-defined roles of the planner and the agency I work. They regulate these roles and the transmissions, the trade of this energy. And the PNH2 is inserted within this governance system of this electrical power in the level of formation of the public policies, and we count on the technical chambers with the two agencies of ANEEL and ANP also attend in a very active way. As Patricia must mention further on. The matrix of electric energy has changed radically from 2001 till now. We used to have a matrix with 80 gigawatts deployed, and we have around 220. The matrix used to be a hydrothermal system with 85% of the capacity of hydraulic capacity, and nowadays we are moving to a matrix that is 55% of hydrothermal, 15% of thermonuclear, and the 35% of renewables, where we can notice exponential growth of the micro and mini generation distributed. And with the main sources, we have the wind, the biomass, and solar one. In terms of centralized plants, and the grid net has followed the expansion as well, and you can see that how we coordinate the expansion of both of them, and how we bring the social environmental issues. We are going to connect to the national system. But you see that this the transmission net has costs, and we have to consider the allocation of these costs to pay the actives and the operation of the network. And what we understand has the agencies that the transition must be fair and inclusive. So we have to count on environmental sustainability, safety, and equality with the correct allocation of resources. It cannot be allocated in the subside of the less favorable economic population in favor of a bigger income population. So when you have the budget of the CDA from 2016 to now, I didn't want to bring the previous period to other issues. Here we can visualize better how the subside of the fossil fuels of the isolated systems is important in the CDE, that is the development OECD. We can consider the social project that is light for everyone, that is the universalization of the access, and the social fee for people with the lower income. And the rural fee that must be also, that is considered also a policy that brings some social benefit. And we can see a very strong growth of the subsides of the sources that are incentivized with the creation of this subsidy in 98, when they changed the law of 1996. That is basically what we call the discount on the fuel. That is the reduction of the use fees for the generators and for the consumers. of this energy that is powered by these generators, these incentivized sources, sort of saying. So that consider wind, solar, and small power plants. And the concern here is exactly about the management of this account, because ANEEL just regulates and survey what is in the surveil or what is in under its competence. So it's very important when they formulate the public policies to consider the weight, the burden, and for the consumer at the end of the line. It can be a regular consumer or an industrial consumer that pays these charges of energetical development. And also we have, despite this challenge, we have an opportunity as the protagonism of the electrical energy, electrical power in this transition, this power transition, when we have this decarbonization of the energy that we can use one of the routes of the electrolysis to produce hydrogen, not approaching it in detail. And why do we have hydrogen? To decarbonize sectors that are hard to do it, like steel, fertilizers, among others, and has also energy or power. And here we have to ensure to certify the hydrogen that must be produced with low carbon emission. Who uses this hydrogen must be sure that it was produced with a low emission production. Otherwise, we cannot reach the decarbonization target.
All right, so the way that the sector is today, with data coming from our survey prepared in 2022, carried out by BP, we have an electrical consumption of about 600 terawatts per hour, and a non-electric consumption which is a 4 times this amount. And we have many types of uses for energy and non-energy uses as well. And from ANEEL's perspective, ANEEL is the Brazilian electricity regulatory agents, and they supervise the research and development program, which is a public policy provided by Brazilian law since the 2000s. And since then, many have invested projects studying hydrogen and also the energy systems integration. And I would like to highlight the pilot project that was carried out in the Pecens compound. And I'm going to use the pointer now. He's going to point to the screen so you can see the hydrogen plant, which is an electrolyzer of a bit more than 1.5 megawatts. And you can see it now pointing out for a solar plant. It's going to be photovoltaic and it's going to produce 3 megawatts. So you can see the way that we set it up, which can or not, and they're not exactly in the same location, and they could possibly be in this compound that can have many users. So it's an industrial compound per se. This compound is going to depend on each case. So the way that this hydrogen plant is going to fit in the electrical grid is going to depend on this organization. So we could have consumer unit linked to the distribution, right? We could have some producers, self-producers. And what is important to stress here is that to monetize the capex of the hydrogen plant, we need to think about the consumption, because its consumption is constant and it's high as well. And the sources that are intermittent, they have different commercial arrangements, which mean they cannot ensure the provision of this flat energy. So the trend here is that the hydrogen plant is going to be used energy from the electrical grid. And if they're using energy from the electrical grid, the energy is a mix of energy, and the certification then becomes even more important in this context. So this is the public policy provided for by Brazilian law, and establishes that part of the profit coming from the energy producers should be invested in research, development, and innovation. And so far, we have implemented 9 projects with this scope of work of studying hydrogen, and we have another 17 projects undergoing, investing in P&D and innovation, and this investment is about 200 million reais today. And based on this result, and the fact that the hydrogen cost is quite competitive from a global standpoint, as many of the panelists already presented today, and I was quite excited when I saw Mr. Thiago's slide in his presentation in the ministry, showing that Brazil have this liberalized cost of hydrogen, finding the word, stemming from renewable power in 20 million markets have the cheapest cost. The Brazilian cost is the cheapest. And according to our law, ANEEL has launched a tender process for P&D strategy, or PDI, which means development, research, and innovation, so as to deal with renewable hydrogen. And you can see some of the guidelines there on the right, like a joint effort and coordinated by many agencies. Also, the free participation, it's always the case for research and development projects. And the global investment is a requirement as part of the profit. It's also going to include the follow-up meetings, seminars, workshops, and the deadline is 48 months, and which can be extended by 60 months, meaning that in 4 or 5 years from now, we expect to have the outcomes of the tender process as we had in previous tender process, like the storage and electrical mobility. So these are many guidelines included in the tender process, and I'm going to highlight this one, which is coming up with framework improvements in terms of the certification in the pilot plant modality, and also the technical viability study, which is going to include the subsidy impact analysis, but also the proposal of improving regulatory frameworks. And if necessary, people can check up this content online. It's available on YouTube. And one of the things that I would say the most important would be producing information and knowledge, especially in regards to the certification mechanisms for produced hydrogen. So in order for this hydrogen to be traded by this pilot plant, as I mentioned before, which could be implemented according to the tender process, this has to go through a certification process, and this needs to be developed within the P&D context. So here we have our deadlines. In June, we launched the tender process. It should be ended now in October. This tender process is usually launched 1 month before the proposals. So we expect to get the proposals by November, presented to ANEEL, the Brazilian Electricity Regulatory Agency, and then they're going to assess these proposals. And if the proposal is approved, in January 2024, we're going to start seeing some results. And by 2027 or January 2028, we can expand that deadline to January 2029 if necessary. So that's what I had to say for this first presentation of our concerns in regards to the regulatory framework for energy production and the hydrogen supply chain. And I'll make use of this time now to let you all know that in the October 25th and 26th, we're going to have the biannual event carried out by the PDI department. It's going to be carried out in São Luís, the state of Maranhão, and it's called CITENEL, as wrote on the screen. And you can check our website for more information. I'm here at your disposal if you have any questions, okay? Thank you so much, Igor. It was a good presentation. I have a very quick question, and I would appreciate if you have a quick answer as well due to time restrictions. So the question is the following. Is there a procedure for connecting the electrical grid as it's a hydrogen producer? And by that, I mean, how do the regulatory agencies see this plant currently? Okay, so the hydrogen plant, it can be perceived as a consumer unit, which is going to be dealt with as a distribution, depending on the features of this plant, in regards to its power as well, its magnitude. So meaning what's the demand to this plant, the demand for if it meets the demand of distribution, it could be a micro distributor, a macro distributor. So it means that they can produce their own energy, solar energy at least. And if they implement an energy that will go above 5 megawatts for this threshold, this could be considered as a self-producer, because then the same company will be producing their energy using photovoltaic panels or solar panels, whatever the source might be, and then they're consuming this energy. But the thing here is that these hydrogen plants, they have to have an intense energy consumption and a flat energy consumption to motivate the capex as well. And as for renewable energy sources that are intermittent, they're not usually capable of providing and meeting the demand of this flat energy demand. So that means that normally this plant is going to be connected to the electrical grid, and at some point it's going to be using the energy from electrical grid, which requires financing and funds for the electrical grid, which in turn makes us have to sort out the certification issue to understand what energy we are using to produce that hydrogen. What is the carbon footprint of this hydrogen being produced? Are we emitting low carbon emission hydrogen or high carbon emission? So the purpose here is to provide this energy transmission so as to achieve this goal. And then we're thinking about using low carbon emission hydrogen. Thank you so much, Igor. I have a different question, but I'm gonna leave it up to the panelists so that we can move forward with the presentation today. So now moving forward with our presentation, I'm gonna move forward to the hydrogen certification. And now I'm gonna invite Patricia Costa, General Coordination for Energies and Low Carbon Emission Technologies for the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources in Brazil. Welcome, Patricia. Thank you so much for being ready to be here today.
Thank you, Ceres. I'd like to congrats all the colleagues that have presented before me. I'd like to share my screen. I think you can see it, right? Not yet, it's coming. There you go. So I am Patricia, the director for the framework, normative framework of National Program of Hydrogen. I'm going to bring some perspective nowadays. I'm going to address in the concerning the regulation of the PNH2, as I've commented at the beginning of this webinar. I would like to bring the context about the program. We have had some updates on the PNH2 in the last month, and here is the summary. What we can see has a potential in Brazil for hydrogen. We have more than 30 billion in projects of hydrogen that were launched in Brazil. It's a conservative perspective, considering some states that are more mature projects. And Brazil also has the technical potential to produce 1.8 gigaton of hydrogen per year. We saw some people bringing like the less global cost for ammonia, among others. But bringing all this context for the hydrogen in Brazil, we developed the National Hydrogen Program that was implemented in 2022, have suffered an adjustment of the governance at the beginning of this year. So it is a context where, for people who are not aware of this program, it was established in the National Committee of the Energetic Policies, and we have the president that followed himself. The first meeting of this council at the beginning of the year, we had the chance to present to him the program, and he gave us the green light to move on with the project and the proposals. We have the tactical team that now we have 10 ministries bringing the management committee, the regulatory agencies, and in technical level, we have 5 thematic chambers to deal with specific topics like MCTE, the capacitation of human resources through the Education Ministry, and the regulatory and legal framework that are run by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, among others. And then we have the 6 main axes of the priority axis of this project. And the 6th axis, the international contribution. We have established a specific chamber that it is intrinsic with all the topics regarding all the chambers. And the legal and regulatory normative on X4. We have a bigger potential of engaging from our part. As I commented, we have had the quarter plan that was published last month. We have presented this plan that had more than 200 people attending, and despite bringing the actions that are proposed for the next coming years, we considered an assertive way what we are thinking for the Brazilian strategy for hydrogen. We have considered some temporal frameworks. Just to remind you, we have done this plan from discussions from the thematic chambers in 2022. We brought it to the public call, and the version that we have published is the version after the public call, considering all the contributions that were brought to us. And also considering the new structure, the new governance structure that we have, for instance, the Sport and Airports Ministry, along together with the other ministries that were forming the program previously. We have defined the main temporal framework. We have till 2025, we have to disseminate the hydrogen pilot plants. In 2030, we want to consolidate Brazil as the most competitive producer. And to 2035, we want to consolidate the hydrogen hubs of low carbon in Brazil. This consolidation, we bring the name of the Pro Hub Brazil, but we want to consolidate it to 2035 to bring it to industrial scale to all the regions of the country. What should we develop to there? The regulatory framework that we have raised during the public call as well, and a lot of things that were brought, the regulatory framework for Brazil, the research, innovation, and incentives for Brazil, the funding, and the educational development, and also the development of the structures and facilities for the development of this project. All of these actions are addressed and mentioned in the plan. There are a lot of actions. We are talking about 65 listed actions. From these, 32 are already in execution, are being performed. And we want to bring a quarter publication at the end of each year, not quarters, each 3 years. And we are going to update about the information that were concluded and including the new activities that are proposed for the year of 2026. From this action, as we have 65 actions, we're talking about a lot of actions. We brought the regulatory framework as a priority and to intensify the investments in P&D, PD&I, and for this point, it specifically brought targets to multiply times 7 the investment on P&D. That is the smaller volume that you have seen in 2020 of 29 million. We want to reach 210 in 2025 to amplify the reach of the funding. Also, is one of the actions that are there. So I'm going to approach a little bit about the chamber of the legal framework that is there. We have there 5 pillars. The first one is the improvement of the institutional, legal, and infra-legal frameworks. What we have to solve, what we have there, what must be solved, and this is the proposal of the normative to deal with the hydrogen as a whole. And we have a component, a pillar that brings to deal with the certification itself. We have the interrelationship in between the sectors. When you talk in between the natural gas with the hydrogen, for instance, the safety is one of the other pillars. And the last pillar is the uses, new uses, and technologies. And we talk about the second, the certification, that is the focus of this webinar. It's summarized, but the right name is different here. Codes, norms, standards, and certification that are published with the national institutions and harmonization with the chronogram and development of the rules, international rules. The mechanisms of certifications for the intensity of carbons in the hydrogen chains and derivatives. So we have performed some interactions to some international institutions for the certification and trade of hydrogen. And we have a group of work to deal with the certification only. And we're going to attend the next meeting that is scheduled for the first week of October, bringing an update over the country about our strategy. It's an annual meeting where all the countries present their strategies. And we have the hydrogen TCP, that is from the National Agency of Energy, and they are also deploying a new group of work to deal specifically with the certification. I'm going to talk a little bit faster about these aspects because there's things that I have brought in detail in the last webinar that we have done at the end of July. And we also have the contribution of delegated actors, while the Brazilian government was contributed to the global colleges that were opening for these two studies. We have the documents that are also there available for who needs to consult, and we also had at the end of July we have followed the discussion and we have collaborated with the conjuncted discussion to speed up the trade of hydrogen. It was in July, it was the launching of the forum of hydrogen trading. And the first forum meeting will be on the 5th of October, where we're going to attend as well. But at the end of July, it was the launching of this forum and the signature of many countries of this global declaration to speed up the trade of hydrogen, and then including some points that we have taken to the discussion, for instance, the conformity of the hydrogen trading with the OMC norms and regulations. So we have linked the hydrogen law. You can see this is was the meeting last month where we started the discussions about the project of law to look over the hydrogen trade in the country. So I'm going to bring it within the detail. This picture was in the first meeting, and we have started a weekly meeting to all the representatives of all the ministries that are there and attending this discussion. So we have presented a first proposal, and we now are discussing within the group. So what we are our propositions there. We have this main aspect that included in the proposal. We have the principles, the taxonomy, that is the definition of what is the kind of hydrogen we want to work with, what is the focus of the National Hydrogen Program, and the competencies, who is going to be the regulator to each part of the process to address each topic, and in specific, the certification, and to have a regulator certificator. That when we bring the proposal in detail, we see in the first part we have the general guidelines that are objectives, fundaments, principles, and the instruments and the policies. So we have this alignment with the national policies, with the international commitments for the decarbonization of the economy. We have a second session with taxonomy and definitions. So we bring you what's the definition of the hydrogen of low emission of carbon. We have brought into the text of the work, but we want to bring in a concrete way in a legal normative. We have the attribution of competences and definitions for the nomenclature naming for the certification. And we have here in a bigger scale, in a wider scale, we want to bring it to the BIL project. I want to explain it in detail because we have approached that, but we want to deal with specifically the green hydrogen, but also all renewable energy sources. Why we are bringing this hydrogen of low emissions? Because we're bringing from other forums that we are engaged to, and is there where we are aligned with the international normatization of it. And we have the on the text, the definitions, the principles of the establishment of the goals, and regarding the certification, we have the definition of the guidelines for certification by intensity of carbon and by production of carbon. Going back to this point, we were defining, when we talk about this low emission of carbon hydrogen, we have the recommendations that the idea is do not use the hydrogen because sometimes it's not very useful to the project, and sometimes it limits some model of business, reducing the competitivity. As we have mentioned, this focus in the low emission hydrogen, we are bringing to the legal text as well. There is a global effort of harmonization of the certification schemes. On the left, you can see a proposal that was brought by the agency of National Agency of Energy to have a hydrogen passport, considering emissions where people are coming from. The idea is to bring a passport where address a lot of different markets. And there also we are proposing in the basic points for the definition and corporations, the limits of emissions and the scope of coverage. So we are proposing a certification that establishes a percentage of emission. And just to reinforce our point, we have seen that we have seen the certification through by routes have generated some controversies. So now they're reviewing that and proposing projects with reviewing the strategy, reviewing the addressing of the certification. The idea is to be connected and updated with the international certifications as well. And coming back, we have the general dispositions over the incentives to hubs, the realization to public beings, and the important point to assess legal changes that over on the competences and the current legislation, how we are going to proceed and how we're going to change the competences to approach this management.
A reunião do Comitê Gestor que tratou especificamente da parte de certificação, então esse é o último.
Alright, so last night we had a committee to deal with this subject, and our idea is that we can come up with a regulatory framework for hydrogen in Brazil, and you can see on the left, you have a diagram coming from the United States Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, so they're showing each regulator for each link of the chain, what is the regulatory agency who is following up each step. So the idea is to incorporate this framework in Brazil as well. I know that I touched that overall, but these are the last updates that we had for the hydrogen program. As I mentioned, we had this meeting last night, so you have the latest updates on this program. And now I'm gonna hand it over back to Seres, and I'd like to thank you for this invitation and being able to present our proposals in details. Thank you so much, Patricia. I believe that your presentation was quite complete. It actually answers questions in advance, a question that was made in the chat. So it was quite clarifying or enlightening. Your presentation was really enlightening, and it gave us some food for thought. So now I would like to ask you, is there any provision or forecast for implementing this bill in Brazil? Sorry, I was on mute. Okay, as I mentioned before, we're having this round of debates within the committee, and we expect to have a forecast at the end of this month. So we're gonna wrap up the draft with this first round table, and once the draft is over, we're gonna forward it to Congress. So as a priority in this debate, we need to touch on all those aspects to be as fast as possible. Okay, thank you so much for this very clarifying and enlightening presentation, also for being here today. And now I'm gonna invite Núria and Gedra to present, and also gonna invite the speakers, both Igor and Luana. She's correcting that Luana cannot be here, unfortunately, because of the place she's at right now. But as for Igor and Patricia, they're gonna be here with us in this round table, so we can have a debate right now. A final conversation to wrap up this cycle of debates on certification within the A2 Brazil project. So now I'm gonna pose to you guys a question, which is a question coming from the board. In your personal view, how do you see the next steps for hydrogen certification at a global level, but also its derivatives? So I'm gonna start this. I know we had an order, but I think I'm gonna change the order. Luana is gonna be, she's correcting it. Núria is gonna be the first one speaking. So Núria is gonna be first, and then we'll have Ricardo Gedra, and he is one of the guests. And then we're gonna wrap up with the speakers, Patricia and Ricardo and Igor. She's correcting it, Patricia and Igor, to wrap up this roundtable. So let's wrap up this first cycle. Núria, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here today, for making the time to be here today. So I'm gonna hand it over to you now, Núria. Thank you so much. Saturday morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here today. Congratulations, Patricia, for your presentation. I really like the information, and I think that is quite relevant. So the question of what are the next steps for hydrogen certification, right? So the first thing that I would say, and I believe Patricia already mentioned that, is that we need to design routes for this work, because we know we have compatibility issues in those projects. So for instance, there are different energy sources or different certification processes as well. And if there is a seal provided by law or not, which might not be compatible with another system. And this question, I would break it down into two categories. And we see that there is hydrogen certification at global level responding to regulatory frameworks. And on the other hand, we have region certifications. There is not in line with international regulation, but they are focused on ESG features. And according to these markets, will define if the legal framework is defined by the country or not. Especially if the production is meant for export, then you'll have the challenge of validating this product as an offset market. And something important to stress out is how to validate this market, the target market, which is going to be in a different country, right? To be selected for this certification. So if we have this system in Europe, and we know that they have this market, this regulatory market in Europe, and they have a specific definition of the product as well. But they wouldn't validate our certification systems coming from other countries. So they have their own process, their own model, and there they have many concepts and also the translation of regulatory agencies. And we know that this is going to vary according to regions. So the next steps for us would be the need of having conversation and exchanges between government and actors. As Patricia already mentioned before, we'll have many interactions with those systems at a global level and other mechanisms. And I know that there are different systems in place, but the systems depend, they really depend whether they're responding to the local market or not. And we also have other systems that will still need to be in compliance with the regulatory milestone. So the challenge here is to clarify this mix-up or this confusion of the regulatory bodies. So for instance, what's going to apply for my plant or your plant? So I guess the right way would be not certifying specific routes, but certifying the larger ones according to the carbon footprint, as well as the energy source. So we'll have all those elements being reported, including technology. As Patricia mentioned before, the naming will also be very important, terminology. I believe it's also be very relevant, so as not to have any mix-up or confusions. And last but not least, I will also say it's important to highlight that we need to incorporate the users in their systems through some stakeholders, meetings or recruitment, like CCE has. And to have this conversation, really, so as to understand the need of each user, the producers of hydrogen and its derivatives. That's it, I guess. That's the answer to the first question. Now I'll hand it over to Ricardo. Thank you. Thank you so much, Núria. Before I hand it over to you, Ricardo, I would just like to clarify that Núria is a manager of strategic consultancy, and Ricardo Gedra is the analyst manager for the Energy Trade Council here in Brazil, CCE. So now I'm going to hand it over to Ricardo once more. Thank you so much for being here today with us. And I'm going to hand it over to you to answer the same question. Thank you so much, Seres. It's a huge pleasure to be a part of this important forum with such relevant people, and I'm super happy to be part of this forum with a lot of women that are so smart. So I'm really happy to be a part of this forum. Now, in regards to the question that you posed, Núria gave us a great answer, and I would comment on that by saying the following. I already believe Luana explained the need of harmonization, of standardization. This is one of our goals. Even though we have a geopolitics matters, so it's hard to get to harmonization in the short term, but obviously we need to have this as a goal to try to consolidate that at a local and regional level, and to be able to converge as much as possible to something that will be more consolidated or will have some minimal criteria or requirements. As Patricia mentioned before, the documentation is very important in terms of the energy section, especially in regards to try to make this in an ISO law. So we're trying to find common ground here, and this is the way to go. And I know the question wasn't that global, but I need to mention the National Hydrogen Program in Brazil that Patricia mentioned, and I believe this is going to be a very important leverage for Brazil to be connected to the global market, and the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources is really concerned about that, and this is key for that which is produced in Brazil can be acknowledged globally. And now the last thing that I want to touch on, and actually expanding our view here, is in regard to this week, this weather week, because we know we have made major weather issues. We are having major discussions on climate change, and it's all revolving around the decarbonization process in which we're going to be using clean energy resources in the world for many applications. Hydrogen is one way to go, but we have many others. So all the clean renewable energies that can be provided by countries globally. And why am I stressing that out? I'm stressing that out because we could possibly have a conflict of the double usage of the same element. Because on the one hand, for instance, Brazil have a large decarbonization program for the rainforest. All of them are working with electrification of fleets, and we're trying to find opportunities to reduce the emissions in those fleets, especially in high temperatures. So all these uses are going to need a certification because at the end of the day, everyone wants to publish that they have been decarbonized, and certification has a lot to do with that. So something worth paying attention to is to look at these energy resources that we're going to use the same sources. Either you're talking about electric or biomass or others, and fund certification will play a fundamental role there, so as to avoid that the same source can be used in more than one use. So this is something that the world actually needs to overcome as a challenge. So that's my answer to the question. Okay, thank you so much, Jadra. It was a very good answer. And you touched on some things that are quite important. So now I'm going to hand it over to our panelists to make their final remarks. First of all, I'm going to hand it over to Idovar from ANEEL. So what are going to be the next steps for hydrogen certification in the H2 global market and its derivatives? Igor. Right, for the global market, what it's really important to have a standardization in terms of methodology, meaning that we can have a traceability to ensure low carbon emissions or low emission of greenhouse gases in terms of equivalent carbon. So something that is very important to highlight when we're talking about regulatory frameworks is that it shouldn't have any obstacles or hurdles. And on the other hand, it's actually need to viabilize this technology. So blockchain is an example because it has some features that are very favorable for this type of application, like transparency, flexibility, and other features that would really help with those microtransactions per se, as the hydrogen in its supply chain. That's what I had to say. Okay, thank you so much, Igor. Now I'm going to hand it over the same question to Patricia. Patricia, from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. The same question for you, Patricia. Thank you so much, Seres. I'm also going to comment on what my two peers touched on. So the next steps at a global level would be having those foreign conversations or foreign meetings. As Nuria mentioned before, it's quite important to have this engagement with stakeholders. And that's why we included in our plan the certification part, more specifically saying that we needed to have standardization, because there's no point in taking a step forward if we don't have the buyer saying what they want to buy. So in this regard, our idea is to have a standardized regulatory milestone, and that could be engaged internationally. So we should do that jointly at a global level. And we understand that this engagement in international forums is quite important. So that's why I touched on in the context of the Clean Energy Ministerial, also aka CEM, which puts together the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources in many countries to deal with clean energy in many areas and regions. And they have a hydrogen initiative. And within this program, within this initiative, we established this working group on the hydrogen trade. And this working group is becoming a forum, which is larger or bigger than CEM. And then we're going to have the participation of more countries. and they're gonna becoming a part of this initiative. And they're gonna have their first meeting on October 5th. So this is the first step to make this formal, this international debate. And we're expecting to have this the debate regarding certification. We'll also have this meeting the first week of October, and running in parallel or simultaneously, we have voluntary certification, just like in other markets for renewable energy. We have ERX, and we have debates on regulated carbon markets. So again, I want to highlight the CCS participation in this process, and we're making progress in terms of voluntary certifications for hydrogen. And by the way, it's included in our action plan. We developed this certification jointly as proposed by CCE. And we want to do this simultaneously. And what I brought in terms of the bill that we're going to present is to have this regulated certification. We're trying to standardize these requirements within the Brazilian legal framework. But we're trying to touch on the regulatory frameworks that are working in Brazil, like RenovaBio. It's a project that's working quite well here. So we want to make use of the structures and adapt to the other project. Okay, I know I've talked a lot already, but I'm gonna comment on that later on. So something that is important to touch on is addressing the double accountability, so that we can incorporate that into the project as well, as mentioned before. I guess that's it. I guess that's all I had to say. We have other programs, as I mentioned before, like the decarbonization of the Amazonia rainforest, to touch on specifically on the rainforest energy issue, but we have also other initiatives, other fronts, and we expect to launch our national policy of energy transition, which is going to encompass many of the projects and energy sources that we're touching on today. So I have many initiatives ongoing simultaneously. Hydrogen is one of them, and I expect to have the certification properly in the minutes that we're going to propose in October. Thank you. Thank you so much, Patricia. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Lu. So as you mentioned previously, Núria, in your personal opinion, what do you think would be a common interest between Brazil and the European Union in terms of certification? So what would be the common ground, something that needs to be highlighted? Before I hand it over to you, I would like to inform the audience that to write down questions on the chat so we can enrich this debate, not only with the participation of speakers, but also coming from the audience, okay? So we're gonna welcome any questions on the chat, please. Now, Núria, the floor is yours. Okay, something important to highlight in this case of the dialogue, right? So I know that we have, in Europe, we have import markets, and in Brazil, we have more export market. So it's important to clarify this difference, and also the issue about translating a regulatory milestones. This is quite important. So we have a concept that is quite used for importance of thinking about this in terms of geography or in terms of Brazil. So in considering the Brazilian network and the Brazilian market, so the space and how this framework works in Brazil. And we have a trend of taking into consideration sub-markets, because we know this could overload the grid. And this is important to think about, that the European Commission will define that the first certification scheme that is going to be launched in your country. It's important to see how this is going to define the concept in the country. So it's important to take this concept into consideration. let's say this country has more than one scheme. So you need to take in consideration the same concept or the same definition in this market. Okay, so you need to find the right concept. And I think this dialogue would be quite important to have. Okay, great. Thank you.
Obrigada, Núria.
Thank you, Núria.
Posso pergunta agora ao
Now I have
Gedra,
a different question for
mas eu vou
Gedra,
a Patrícia,
but also for Patricia
porque eu acho que engloba
and even Igor,
esse lado brasileiro.
because it has to do with the Brazilian side of things.
Foi comentado muitas vezes em todas as
So as mentioned before, in every presentation, they touched on the diversity and taxonomy side of things and the importance of those, of course. But I would like to hear from you about that, really. So does the national certification, could the national certification have more routes than the international certification? So before I hand that over to you, I want to comment on Igor's presentation, showing how the OECD process works and the impact of using, she's correcting it, not the impact, she's correcting it, the increase of the cost and the impact of this cost increase in the process. That's what she meant. So now I want you to comment on those 4 questions. I'm going to start with Gedra, then we're going to go to Igor and then Patricia, okay? Gedra? Okay, thank you so much, Seres. All right, if we compare the national versus international context, it has a lot to do with the buyer, as mentioned before. So if the buyer has a set of requirements, they're the ones who define it. So if they want to meet the demands of that market, they need to comply with the buyer's requirements. So the problem is something that Giovanni Machado always mentions, is that you start to have too many segregations in the market. Because each buyer market has its own requirements, you're going to have a very strong segregation in the world. And this increases cost in the world because the products are not interchangeable in terms of its carbon footprint or any attribute that might be associated with its qualification. So this is something that depends on that, really the specificity. And you asked us about Brazil, right? So when someone in Brazil wants to meet the demands of an international buying market, they will need to meet the requirements of this market. Now, if it's for domestic use, then you need to meet the demands of the domestic market for our national hydrogen program, right? As our national regulatory framework. So you touched on the different requirements. Obviously, some requirements might be the same. So the carbon footprint is probably a requirement for all of them, right? And we expect this to be not only a requirement, but the way of calculating or doing the math. So this would be ideal. But some other markets, a different market, might have additional requirements. And in this regard, just like we have a passport model, you could have minimal requirement and additional requirements, right? So you can meet the requirements of minimal requirements, and sometimes they need to meet more demands, additional demands. So that's what I had to say. Thank you, Seres. Igor, the floor is yours.
Séries, a questão que a gente observa, né, quando eu projetei ali o orçamento da...
All right, Seres, when I prepared the budget for OECD,
aumentou significativamente naquele
we noticed that we had a significant increase from 2016 to 2023, which was the cutout used here. So it was less than 20 billion reais, and this year we expect 35 billion reais. So 10 million reais are forecasted for subsidies because of discounts made to the energy production or generation. So the smaller share was 7.5 billion. In terms of consumption, when we consume from the subsidized energy sources like solar energy, wind energy, and biomass energy, basically, and also small dams or small size hydroelectric plants. So this subsidy is meeting the demands of these consumers with this subsidy that is costing Brazil 9.3 billion a year. Again, 9.4, 9.3 billion a year in reais, and 6.7 billion reais for consumption at a distribution level. So what happens? It's finding the words, guys, just a minute. If you want to have hydrogen production for exports, and the energy that is going to be used, or the energy that this plant uses, is making use of this subsidy, this federal subsidy. Like that, I mean that if we increase the density of this production chain, we need to run a cost-benefit analysis to see if it fostering this production chain is actually valuable or not, or beneficial. We can think about that for hydrogen, but we can also think about that for other products. So I wouldn't say this is necessarily an issue, an offtake for the buyer or for the importer. I wouldn't say paying for this cost is a problem. What I would like to point out is that if we have this subsidy, as I mentioned, subsidized sources provided by Brazilian law, if we don't increase this supply chain, we're going to be transferring income from Brazilian citizens to consumers in other places, to foreign consumers. And that would not be sustainable for a global level, meaning that this cost will supersede the systemic benefits. So the same way that we want to use hydrogen, he's trying to find his words, to use hydrogen to produce green steel or to decarbonize cement production at a national level, or if you want to produce celluloses and paper from celluloses with less greenhouse gases emissions. I'm not sure cellulose is the best example because this type of paper doesn't use so much hydrogen during its process, but we could think about fertilizers or oil refineries that use hydrogen. So in terms of public policies, we want the Brazilian industry to be able to compete with this foreign industry of this low carbon emission industry that is being developed at a global level? So I would say that we had a positive response from the industry in Brazil. So we need to find this balance between the subsidies that are provided for in Brazilian law, it's trying to find his word, without having to redesign the whole project. So we know that the subsidy has the date to end, the expiry date, and we have a deadline for that. Even though we have that, the amount of subsidized plants here in Brazil is large, it's considerable, it's significant, really. It has a certain magnitude compared to the national framework in the country. So the answer to this question posed would be how to find the balance between those elements. It's about a clear energy transition, or a fair energy transition. It needs to be equitable and fair. Awesome, thank you, Igor. Now I'm going to hand it over to Patricia for her final remarks. Thank you so much, Seres. So like comment on what my colleagues mentioned. So Nuria mentioned Europe and zones, right? And we also have the same debate here in Brazil of zones, because many project developers here in Brazil search the ministry to find what we have been developing and how to address those issues. So there is this debate of how we're going to address what is called the bidding zone. Is this going to be the national system or subsystem? Or if it's a new project, is it going to be prepared off-grid, outside our grid? It could be carried out differently. So this debate is being carried out internally. And it has to do with the development of our next steps. As we had in the A2 Global at first, so we started to have some of this debate addressing these project developers that wanted to try for this tender process. And now I would also like to highlight the fact that we're having some companies here running the project, and we're compiling this project on our database in the EPE website. So I'm going to invite all of you to take a look at it. So if the project is not compiled there yet, then you can inform us. So then we can include this project and map it. So you're going to have different maturity levels, since pilot projects or larger projects or even industrial scale projects, so that we can compile all this information. So this is an initial version of a platform that we're going to develop, and it's going to compile and put together all this data on hydrogen in Brazil. And by the way, this is the mapping of the undergoing processes. And this is very important because we're also a part, going back to the international discussion, we also give subsidies to international organizations in terms of what's going on in Brazil. So we're part of the Global Hydrogen Review 2023. This should be published in 2 days from now, on the 22nd, on September 22nd, with our latest update on this Brazilian strategy. So we'll have this map of which countries develop a hydrogen strategy, which countries have not. So for the first time, I'm going to have this version with Brazil spearheading with its hydrogen strategy. So we're going to have many consultancy processes to make this work. And this year, we were able to actually check out everything that is going in the country. So I want to wrap up with this news. 2 days from now, we're going to publish the new report from the National Energy Agency here in Brazil. Thank you so much, Patricia. So I pose this question to Igor, but you can also answer the question, okay? Because I think it's a very good question, which is, I'm going to rephrase the question. I'm going to expand the question, actually, so that other can answer that, including Nuria, if she feels comfortable with the question. So how can other technologies like the storage system, including other questions like the biomass use and the ethanol use and the refurbishment, so can this be supported on the H2 supply chain? And how will those technologies, these storage systems are perceived within the PN2 project? So how are those technologies perceived here in Brazil? So now I want to, this question was initially addressed to Igor, but I would like you to comment on that. So I'll ask you to be brief. Nuria, would you like to comment on that? Well, I would like to hear from others, and then I'll see if I'll comment, okay? Jedra, would you like to start this debate? Jedra, Igor, and then wrap it up with Patricia, and Nuria will feel free to answer this question or not. So I'm going to repeat this question. So I want to know about other routes or other technologies like the storage system and its contribution to supporting the supply chain of hydrogen. So as to develop the hydrogen supply. In this specific case, I'm addressing Brazil, but obviously I know you have the expertise to deal with that at a local level in other places. So first of all, I'm going to hand it over to Jedra. Thank you so much, Seres. So first of all, hydrogen has many potentials and uses, and it can be integrated into many processes throughout the supply chain and the value chain, and even the consumption chain and energy chain. So whenever we address that, I would say it can support the industry, the fertilizers industry, the cars industry, and as you touched on the storage side of things, it can be stored and transported, but it's not a key resource in terms of producing electrical energy, because we have electrical dams here in Brazil, and it's working super well, but in some countries, that's not an option, like in Brazil it is. So they will have to find alternatives for that. Recently, I watched a presentation from Singapore, and they have a small area, geographically speaking. So they're using a lot of natural gas there. And the alternative for decarbonizing that was having a clean energy brought from neighboring countries or using hydrogen. But we need to regulate that, we need to storage that energy, so it would be vital for some countries. But Brazil can rely on other resources, and Brazil can use this hydrogen as proper as feeding. So that's what I had to say. Okay, thank you. Igor? Just trying to phrase the question. So these types of technologies, of storage technologies, refer to current issues that we have with renewable energies, as mentioned before. So I believe Jader's answer was really good, and TCEs have an interlinked system, because when we talk about storage systems, we actually are talking about the systems that are not linked to this system when we use, she apologized, she's going to correct it, to make this energy more stable to the system, especially when linked to the electrical grid. But anyway, I would like to hear from you guys if this would be helpful for the process, especially in terms of reducing impacts and problems that renewable energy can cause. Okay, Seres, first of all, I would like to correct something about my previous answer. So when I'm referring to public policies, obviously, once we define it, once it's provided by law and approved, this is going to be what's going to be used or enforced. So this is an open debate, obviously, thinking about how ANEEL, our regulatory agency, can give us inputs to this debate of designing this hydrogen market, because that's what we're dealing with. We're designing the market at the end of the day, a global market, but it's a market design, really. And it depends on a lot of issues or matters, because as Ricardo mentioned, if you have products that are not interchangeable between one another, due to the certifications, you're going to have a reduction of the liquidity or the profit margin of those markets, because they will have less income or less transaction volume. So this is going to have an impact on cost, obviously. Like it's natural for the market. Every time you create niches or sectors in the market, you end up reducing the liquidity rate with an impact on costs. Now, in regards to storage, if I understood your question, we could use a hybrid plant. It could be a solar and wind energy connected to the electrical grid, so as to meet this demand of the hydrogen plant or the electrolysis plant. And as long as it complies with the laws and rules, it's fine. But then the entrepreneur needs to understand if that's beneficial or not in the cost benefit analysis. So if it's financially viable, meaning if this entrepreneur understands it's worthy, then they're taking on the risk, right? So they need to carry out this analysis. the whole business as usual, as we know. And all of that to say that nowadays, a hydrogen plant that's connected to the grid is going to be dealt with as a consumer unit, as a regular one, depending obviously on the features of each unit, as I explained before. So in regards to storage, we are expecting to have that with subsidies, and we're going to run regulatory impact analysis. It's ongoing. And soon we're going to see that provided for in the law. It could be storage, it could be a battery, but it also could be a reversible plant. So now our regulatory agency, they need to be exempt or non-responsible for the technology. And I think that's fundamental, because each technology has its upsides and its downsides. So it's really about finding this balance and commitment in this assessment of alternatives. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Igor, for your feedback. Patricia, would you like to make your final remarks?
Bom, a gente está especificamente sobre essa questão que veio aí.
Now, in regards to, we got a question on YouTube about new routes and new technologies, right? So within our regulatory framework, we have a specific component to deal with those new technologies. And there we have some initiatives that were already mentioned before. So within the ANEEL regulatory framework, she's phrasing the sentence, just a moment. So the last part of our action plan or working plan coming from this body, the idea is the following. As we develop that, we're going to be implementing new uses of technology, and then we can address them in legislation or Brazilian law. So we already have that provided for hydrogen transportation, and we also have other definitions as in Metro's definitions for hydrogen. And the idea is once we have more of those, we also need to advance on the legal side of things so that we'll have all of those provided by laws for the regulators so that they can produce the legislation moving forward. So that could be addressed later on. Sorry, they interrupted each other. Oh, you also asked about deadlines. So we want to have this version that can be publicly divulged to get into the nitty-gritty details in terms of laws here in Brazil. I'm going to present that later on. Okay, we're expecting that anxiously. As we're getting to the end of our meeting, I'm going to hand it over to Núria. If you want to comment on the previous question, feel free to do it. But I'll ask her to do her final remarks in regards to what the most important message you would like to convey here in regards to certification. What you think it's important for the progress of the certification process and also for developing the hydrogen economy in Brazil, okay? Núria, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Seres. I believe that my colleagues mentioned the most important things about storage. They also touched on the renewable energy side of things, that they need to be harmonized or standardized. The only thing that I could add here, I guess, is that in the case of the European market, for storage, it's important to take into consideration the coordination part of things, especially dealing with hydrogen and the electrolysis process, and the role of hydrogen in this process. And from January 1st, 2030, this is going to be mandatory. So this will have to be taken into consideration, hydrogen plants. And I think that in Brazil, this has been debated within the government. The collaboration is being debated here in Brazil. So to have countries that export like Brazil and the regulations of the target market. And on the other hand, we can also think about the infrastructure, which is a separate theme, but it's very important. And I'm referring to the infrastructure that you need to have to adapt and to be converted into CAPEX for private, public initiatives, but also private initiatives for different developers. And they're all these developers are trying to clarify their projects, trying to collaborate with regional governments. I know that regional government is quite strong in the sense of having this shared use of resources. But it's a very important challenge to sort out. The investment in this infrastructure is very important to highlight as well. I think that's it. I think that, and the certification side of things is also very important, as you mentioned. We should include the users in this process, in the design of the system as well. I think that's a good way to go. I think it's going to be very interesting to hear from analysts as well. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Núria. I appreciate your comment. Now I'm going to hand it over to Ricardo Gedra. If you can make your final remarks, what kind of message would you like to convey as your final message for this last workshop? Thank you so much, Series. I'm going to make use of a message that Luana wrote, which has to do with target market. So it's important to be very clear about the target market, because as our hydrogen, low carbon emission hydrogen market is not mature, our market is very green or young yet. So as it's not mature yet, you cannot have a universal product. So I'm making use of what Luana said. It's important to have clarity in terms of what is your market, target market. If it's an international market, you should focus on certification properly to it. And if it's a domestic market, Brazil is doing the same as every country is doing. So each country is making use of the mechanisms and subsidies, and they will vary according to their region and countries, obviously. And to achieve the subsidies, you need to produce hydrogen as something that is acknowledged as valid within each country's system. So it's important to be very clear about target markets, and that's key. And the last thing that I want to say, and it's something that someone mentioned before, I don't know who, that the certification is very important, and that you need to take it into consideration when to start designing the process, because it's very important in terms of the decision-making process, in terms of the business model, where you're using the plant. So it's very important to take into consideration that, so that you can implement this project, and then you can have the certification for it, and to reduce the cost as much as possible. So that's what I had to say. I would like to thank you all for the opportunity of being here today, and to thank for the series that is wrapping up today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gedra. All of you were great partners throughout this entire cycle. Igor, would you like to make your final remarks? Okay, Sadie, so it's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. I would like to thank you once more for this invitation and for the trust that you placed in me. And I would like to highlight that the public notice or tender process is a way of fostering the industry with PDI. And one of our guidelines is developing and using mechanisms, certification mechanisms for hydrogen. The hydrogen that is going to be produced by this pilot plant. And besides this technological development aspect, one of the goals of this tender process is to develop suppliers and human resources. Develop them in terms of technology, but also the access of people to technology. So the fact that this is going to be mandatory of having an off-taker to buy this hydrogen that is being produced by this pilot plant could create associations, collaborations, and it could improve an add value to the chain, because it's going to help us doing the match between national producers and foreign producers or foreign industries that want to invest in the decarbonization process. And something else that is worth highlighting is that this public notice or tender process is also meant to understand how important the certification is, so as to ensure that plants will have an offtake, as Ricardo mentioned, it will probably have, and I think he was right, so that we have figures or forecasts in real life of how we can apply this technology in real life. So I think that will be fundamental or adamant for the sector, especially if you want to improve the regulatory framework for public policies, but for general use as well. Because as the results of the stand-up notice will be produced in 4 or 5 years from now, this first wave will not going to be make use of these changes, because we're designing this project before the results coming from the real world per se. So we know we'll have other studies being carried out in parallel, but as we get these results in 4 or 5 years from now, then we'll be able to reassess the impact of this regulatory framework of what we're designing today in terms of public policies, rules, and norms, and also the regulation of this policy for the agency. Okay, perfect, Igor. Thank you so much for your final remarks. And now I'm going to hand it over to Patricia. Patricia, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Seres. I would like to thank all my colleagues and peers that are part of today's seminar, but also to everyone that is watching us on YouTube. So it's a huge pleasure to be here today and to get to this 5th certification webinar. This theme is extremely important for the hydrogen market development, both in Brazil and in the world. So this is going to have a direct impact on investment decisions. And this debate has some geopolitical nuances in terms of countries' engagement at a global level. And over these 5 webinars, we heard from many actors in the hydrogen market. So we have governments, besides the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, we also have ANEEL, we had private institutes, we had researchers, foreign researchers and scholars, and we were able to identify today Brazil's potential to act within this market. And we noticed there's a lot being developed here in Brazil. The private actors are engaged and developing a lot of projects. And in the academia, we're also highlighting many of Brazilian initiatives, like the recent discovery of geological hydrogen in new regions in Brazil. So many countries don't have this potential yet, and we have. And the government is also engaged, and they're applying the National Hydrogen Program and public policies for the sector. And we expect to be able to convey to the world everything that we're doing here. So we want to divulge and spread this message, and to also to engage in the international and foreign debate, so as to establish a proper certification in such a way that we're able to develop this market and also the hydrogen industry as a whole in our country. Thank you so much, Patricia, for your message. I would like to thank all the speakers today, everyone that is here today, and the audience as well, everyone that is watching us. But before we wrap it up, I would like to highlight the fact that this cycle consisted of 5 webinars, and a lot of our speakers were part of the previous webinars. And you can see on the screen our website, where you can access the recordings of the previous events, including other events included in the H2 Brazil program. So the H2 Brazil program, as a they have 5 fronts, and one of the outputs, each output has 8 activities with countless products, and all of those will be made available for the audience at the end of the presentations and initiatives. So I would like to invite the audience to access our website, find this information and make use of it. So that's why we're producing this information and data. That's why we're presenting such relevant topics with such important people, so as to foster the development of hydrogen economy in Brazil. So thank you so much for all the speakers. I would like to thank everyone that is here today, the audience that was part of this workshop, watching us online. I would also like to thank the NIDA staff members, Zeca, José Slokovic, who is in the backstage helping us. And he's one of the coordinators, just like myself. He's one of the coordinators of A2 Brazil program by NIDAS. I would also like to thank Felipe, who is our team leader, and obviously the entire GNZ team, starting with Mike Strempf, Andre, Luciano, Ashken, that have been coordinating the project's Output 1, besides the other fronts included in this project. And if you access our website, you're going to be able to find all that information, okay? So now I'm wrapping up our webinar. I'd like to thank all of you. And obviously, I'd like to stress the partnership with HAK, without which we wouldn't be able to get to this audience and to carry out all those webinars that we did. So it's a great partnership and a long-standing partnership with the HAK and GNZ that fostered the promotion and the realization of this webinar. So thank you so much, Patricia, Ricardo, Núria, Igor, and all the ones involved. Thank you so much.